The Providence Evening Press reports in 1883 reports of what must have been Goliath. This time in Montana, reports of giant skeletons belonging to a prehistoric race protruding from the banks of a ravine reported as being close to 12 feet in height with a 12 to 15 inch head length with a circumference of 40 inches and thigh bones measuring 30 inches long. The foot was 18 inches long and its great toe 3 inches long above the nail. An article from the 1893 edition of The Sun reports on the 8 or 9 feet tall skeletons of supposed mound builders. The mound was opened by the curator of the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh, with giant remains reported as being between 8 and 9 feet in height. The mound itself was 12 feet tall and about 100 feet long, estimated as being 400 years old, and created by a prehistoric race that predated the modern American Indians. The torso and portions of the big skeleton were shipped to the Carnegie Museum, but that is the last anyone has heard of them. The St. Paul Globe reported on a giant in 1904. Bones of a giant human skeleton were dug up in Nevada at a depth of about 12 feet underground. Examined by Dr. Samuels, the man stood at nearly 11 feet, with portions of the hand and leg being of a very large proportion. In 1908, the New York Times reported on a find, this time in Mexico. A cave in Mexico gives up the bones of an ancient race. A cave containing some 200 skeletons of men, each above 8 feet in height, evidently a burial place of a race of giants who preceded the Aztecs. One of the skeletons stood at 8 foot 11 inches tall, with molars described as big enough to crack a coconut, and a head that measured 18 inches from front to back. Of course, there are many more examples, and these are not limited to North or even South America, as the New York Times reports in 1892 from Europe. In the year 1890, some human bones of enormous size, described as double the ordinary, were found in England and originally reported by the London Globe. The professor examining the find says the bones belong to a very tall race, abnormal in dimension, and opens the question of the giants of antiquity. Almost as mysterious as the finds themselves is what has happened to all of these remains since being discovered. While many articles claim that the skeletons were shipped to various museums, they cannot be accounted for and seem to have simply vanished sometime after the publications. One cannot simply dismiss them as fabrications or tribal legends, as many of the articles mentioned established doctors and well-known professors as the people measuring the physical skeletons and artifacts. The Smithsonian Institute, easily the world's largest museum complex, began from the generous gift of James Smithson, an English scientist who in 1829, when he passed away, bequeathed his fortune to nephew James Henry Hungerford, with the stipulation that if this man died without an heir, the remainder of the fortune would go to the United States. Hungerford died in 1835, and the Smithsonian officially began in 1846. Mr. Smithson's legacy to the American people was, in his own words, quote, "for the increase and diffusion of knowledge." Unfortunately, it seems that instead of diffusing knowledge, the organization seems to spend a great deal of effort into acquiring or confiscating and storing finds and concealing them, not making them available to the public. In 1882, after some 36 years of growth and accumulating ancient artifacts and remains, the Smithsonian created a Bureau of Ethnology, and a decision was made sometime after to suppress information, despite the evidence of ancient races that predated the modern-day Native Americans. And this is not restricted to those of gigantic proportions, but include pre-Columbian civilizations reported to have reached the New World,